would you like to give just a background of maybe our concept around the Wellbeing Design series?
Yes. So welcome everyone to the Wellbeing by Design original live season. We're on episode 2, Cultivating a Work-Life Balance. So Wellbeing by Design is an original series with Dr. Juliette Tobias-Webb and myself, Vishal George. And the idea is to explore some of the research insights and practical tools from behavioral science so that we can more mindfully live a life with intention and purpose. And we wish to support others around us to feel equipped to apply these tools to create a larger impact around us. And the conversation today is going to be focused on cultivating a work-life balance. And we'll open up the conversation to the room for the second half of the session. If you do change our minds on any of the topics which we present, you get bonus points. So we'd love for you to add your own insights, reflections, and discussions, and so we can learn together as we go forward. Starting off, maybe I'd love to open up the conversation with you, Juliette, on the conversation around why is it important to maintain a healthy work-life balance?
Yeah, sure. Maybe we even step back and consider what is work-life balance. And I think that's really interesting. Over the years, I've thought about this a lot, particularly in the MBA class that I teach around what does, and actually in my personal experience, right, through working with different corporate organizations of what does work-life balance mean. And while it seems quite obvious at times, potentially for some people, others not so much. And really it's about balancing your responsibilities at work and at home. And that involves balancing also your mental health, so having some level of self-awareness, the ability to plan. But what it doesn't mean is an equal balance of work between hours worked at work and hours spent at home. So rather more of absent of conflict between responsibilities. So some people will like to invest more in their work and less in their home. And if they're comfortable with that and there's no conflict between their responsibilities, then that's fine. Other people, again, the opposite end of the spectrum can happen where they want to spend more time at the home and not at work, and a little bit of both. I've heard a really great talk too from a lady at Google once that was talking about she doesn't have balance in a day, but she'll have balance over a week or a month. So some days are full work days and maybe long work days where she doesn't get to see her family as much, but then there are other times when you spend a lot more time there. So really work-life balance is more around that absence of conflict between your responsibilities rather than necessarily set structures or rules, unless that's something that works for you.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a vital point, that the lines between home, work, and play, they're all very blurred right now, especially when we bring a lot of our devices back home, our laptops and our mobiles, at a time where some countries are still in lockdown. That separation is even weaker now more than anything. Does that ring true to you?
Definitely. I mean, I'm quite good at, I don't have a lot of my work email on my phone, so which might make some people a little bit more anxious, but that way I can separate easier. So when I'm on the computer and I can still access my emails if I want to on my phone, but that's my kind of work-life balance where I have this kind of structured time where I'm not getting bings all the time. It depends on how that works. But I also think there's aspects here of, yes, there's definitely blurred. This is definitely becoming much more blurred, particularly from working at home. So you're seeing people are working or at least logging in for longer hours, whether or not they're working those full hours is interesting. It's also blurred because we used to sort of get up and get out and then come back, and generally speaking, by the time you get home, your mindset's a little bit more blurred, and therefore you're more likely to kind of take a bit of time off or have a bit more work-life balance because you actually have had time to kind of wind down and separate. But what we'll talk about later too, ways in which you can have work-life balance and how that might now be changing at home in terms of how the balance is a bit more difficult in terms of working from home. But in terms of, I'm going to go back to that first question that you said too. I mean, this probably sounds, again, quite intuitive to a lot of people, but in terms of the outcomes of work-life balance, you actually find that if people have work-life balance, and this is from an organizational level as well as individual level, you often get higher productivity of that person. So if you're feeling overworked, you get sort of states of depression, stress, absenteeism, and burnout. With work-life balance, when you actually have more of a balance, you also don't get that sort of scarcity mindset, and that means that when you're scarce in a resource, so if this is time and you're preoccupied with the time that you should be spending somewhere else, or the stress that the poor time that you think you have. So if you're scarce in a resource, you actually make poorer decisions. And so this is sort of some work out of the US by Sendil Milan and some of his co-authors. But it has, and I'm sure people feel this as well, actually taking breaks and taking time out for work and family have productivity benefits, have organizational benefits, and have mental health benefits.
Yes, completely agree with you. And I would take it one step further and say that companies potentially have a moral responsibility then, knowing the impact of a good work-life balance on health outcomes of their people and health outcomes of citizens. There's a moral responsibility which also lies with companies, as well as the productivity gains which they get with looking after people.
Can I add to that? It's hard though, because some companies value the churn. Like they want people to come in to work hard for 6 to 12 months, and then they value the churn, and that's not necessarily a good thing, but it is something that there's a trade-off there in your choices as well. And then there's other companies that are focusing more on ways to retain employees for longer periods of time through work-life balance.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think about bring one of the elephants in the room, and probably the smallest elephant being our smartphone, our mobile phones, which we carry around with us all the time, and the slow, insidious barrage of information which we get through these devices. I came across data recently which suggests that we tend to open our phones, check out notifications somewhere between 110 to 150 times a day. And this constant barrage of information clutters both our mind, our ability to do work, as well as our rest. And there's been some interesting research done on the impact of these small little micro stress doses, if you'd like. So micro stress doses can be thought about these little doses of stress which we get through the day. So it could be via an email which we get, which we forget that we've not responded to, or a notification about an overdue payment, or guilt which we may feel by not checking in with our partners or loved ones. And while in isolation, a micro stress dose doesn't mean very much, as these micro stress doses accumulate, we start getting nearer to our stress thresholds. I'm keen to hear your thoughts, Juliette. Are there any insights to help us navigate our space with our digital tools?
I mean, this is a behavioural scientist's gold question, right? But actually, can I just add to that it's quite interesting you say that from a reflection point of view, because when we're particularly in the office, we might get these micro stresses, but we get up and we walk around. And so we have a level of awareness of our stress. And I'm not talking about this, but something that I've reflected on and I don't have the answer to is when I'm working now long periods of time at home, sometimes I'll get up and I'll walk out of the office, out of the room, basically. And I'll notice once if I go and get a coffee or something like that, that I'm shaking and that I have that my stress levels must be high, but I've been so focused on my work for 3 or 4 hours. And so I wonder actually if there's these macro stresses that are happening now and that you're not aware of. So one thing here that is critical, particularly for work-life balance, that is hard, is self-awareness as well. Like, how do you stop and check in with yourself and say, this balance over the day, but also in blocks of period of time are working for me, and what's not. So I actually don't have an answer to that. I'm pretty, as you probably can tell, high energy person. So it's something that I don't know the answer to, but I notice I'll go outside and I'm like quite shaking, and I'm like, is this a stress response? Is this that I've just got too much energy and I haven't burned it for a day? But I do think now there's going to be these macro stresses almost of us, where we're sitting for long periods of time, and when we're taking breaks, particularly because of lockdown, we're going and picking up my phone to mimic it, even though we can't see. We're not giving ourselves that time to actually have self-awareness, regulate our emotions, and regulate not even our emotions, our physiological systems, basically. So then how could we design for this? Well, so I think there's interesting aspects here. I think there are, as sort of you said earlier in a discussion we had offline, there are individual ways to regulate your work-life balance or take control of your work-life balance. And these micro stresses, albeit we can give them to you, how easy they are, how much they work, will be really interesting. And that's why we also want to hear from you about what you believe work-life balance is, but also some of the strategies that you use, or the situations, and how applicable these strategies would be. And some are at an organizational level. And basically, a key aspect of behavioral science is that we do not necessarily rely always on the human to change. We think about how we can change the environment to help the human act on their intentions. And I say that because I'm not going to say it will be very useful for you to remember to stop and reflect, but how can you then design the environment to send a prompt or something for you to stop and reflect? Like, how, rather than you relying on yourself to always have perfect self-control, to put your phone away when you can hear it buzzing, what strategies can you do? So I guess the first overall strategy is consider your environment and what you can do in your environment itself to prompt yourself to either have more work-life balance, to take breaks when you need to. I know somebody that looks at the statistics of meetings versus hours spent with family, so it brings greater awareness of the time they spend at work versus the time that they spend during work. The other thing is we spend a lot of our time at work, so we have to have work-life balance, a balance of our well-being in work, and then a work-life balance as well.
Yes, absolutely. Just jumping in, and you hit the nail on the head. The biggest changes which we can make are not individual changes necessarily. These are structural changes, or changes organizations can make, which can help people thrive. And I think it's really worth emphasizing on the biggest impact can come from these organizational changes. And they don't have to be large, big changes. They can be, and I think they should be, but they can also start with very small changes. So right from imposing no email evenings, for example, or moments through the workday where people come together and share food without devices. So no device lunches, for example, and you're really able to foster real conversations between people and help grow relationships with colleagues, which are equally important for us to take back to our workplace when we get back into work mode. Are there any other organizational changes you have in mind?
So from an organizational perspective, there's the shorter work weeks that have been being trialed, where people have 4-day work weeks where they work either 4 days or a little bit longer on those 4 days, and then they have an additional day off. So Microsoft has done this. Inventium is a company in Melbourne that have looked at this, and they've all seen actually huge productivity increases by working 4-day work weeks. Whether or not, though, that is because it's a novel concept and everyone right now wants 3 days off versus if it's actually giving you time to reflect and recharge is quite interesting. So, but no matter what, it is a good strategy to help people be more productive in the current environment. So other things that I've talked about, which haven't necessarily been tested with different companies, so is thinking about, is there ways that you can set walking meetings, but also like time people out? If you know that actually, so there's research around, if you can take very frequent breaks, you learn much faster. So this comes from some neuroscience research, you know, when you're playing a piano, if you have very regular 10-second breaks, you learn at a much faster rate. So if you can like time people out, if they've been on their computer, you can see them working after 2 hours, and you have sort of, you know, 1 minute pauses, almost like breaks in plays that they have in gambling situations where it causes people to stop and reflect, and then just say, yes, I want to continue on, or I don't. So taking them out of a hot flow state for periods of times is something interesting, or blocking people from working at certain hours. I mean, they're like ideal state things that will definitely not always work, right? But structural aspects. I've heard that Microsoft Office has started to block out periods of deep thinking space for people. But then if I can give like some of the individual strategies that I love, one is there's some research by a researcher called Kosek that looks at analysing your preferred working style. And it says that there are 3 types of working styles. One is separators. That is individuals who like to separate their work and their family life. And these are the individuals that generally, you know, get up in the morning, they might exercise, or that they, you know, they spend time with their family, then they go to work from 9 till 5, and they don't see any of their friends or family members, say, and they're just at work, and then they come back to their work, their home life, and they don't interact with their work life, right? So they separators, their work from home life. Then there are integrators. I'm 100% an integrator. And that is basically, you like to break your day up with personal things as well. So I'll often be working on projects in the morning, and then I'll go for lunch with somebody, or maybe a quick coffee. And so I end up working longer hours, same amount of hours, but a longer day, because I break it up with social things. So integrators are people that like to integrate their work and their life into the day. And then there's cyclers. So that is somebody who likes to work more in seasons. So you might have, you know, be someone who loves summer, and you work all through your work involves, you know, the water or something. So you work all through summer, and then you take winter off. So there's that. Curiously, can I just ask who thinks that they would be a separator? If you want to put your, you can use reactions down on the right-hand corner. Do people think they're separators? Yeah, a few people. Does anybody here, okay, if we go reactions down, do you think that you might be an integrator? As I said, I'm 100% an integrator. Maybe by virtue of it being 4 p.m. Sydney time at least, and a few people are on personal and professional time like that. Anyone here cycler or a cyclic? No? Okay. Yeah, some people are. So here are some other strategies to think about then. So and when I say this is, you can start to think about how you might want to position your day if you're a separated integrator. It also gives you an understanding of how you might want to manage your employees, understanding that some people work differently. So the 9 to 5 structure doesn't always work for individuals. Now, about that, there's some really amazing work from Adam Grant, who's an organisational psychologist in the UK, and he talks about managing your attention, not your time. The criticism here is if you have children, it's very difficult to manage your attention. But this is, if you know when your attention is the highest, so for me, that is in the mornings, if you manage your attention and you work then, you are much more productive than if you manage your time. So asking me to work 9 to 5, great, but sometimes I'm not feeling it, sometimes I am. And so actually what you find is people are much, much more productive, and you will likely be much more productive if you manage your work around your attention, not necessarily manage your work around time, like having to be in the office at certain times. With my team, I often think about task-based outcomes to think about this over a week, not time-based outcomes. So as long as the tasks seem like they'll take you, a week to do whenever you do them, to some extent is fine, so that people can then manage their attention more than just sitting in a chair for a period of time. Yeah.
Love those insights. You've jam-packed years of academic insights in less than 5 minutes. If I may add, before we pass on the conversation, the conversation to the room, just one insight, and that's challenging our notion of glamorizing hard work. I know in Japan and Korea they have a word for working yourself to death, and when you have a word for it, that means you have a serious issue with it. And I think many of our assumptions around hard work we've kind of got them totally backwards. I think we need to pay attention to rest as much as, and particularly play, as much as we glamorize hard work. And for super busy people, or people who are very passionate about what they do, it's actually very hard to detach themselves from work. I have experienced the same for many years, and I have described myself as a work addict in the past, hopefully moving away from it. But play plays a valuable role, especially deep play, when we're very immersed into play, because quite paradoxically, it offers the same psychological reward of work without the stressors which follow work. And it can serve as a creative playground. So lots of our ideas and the sort of aha moments which we have actually emerge from play. And I'd like to maybe think about or challenge our notion to start thinking about moments of deep play not being viewed as a competitor to work, but as a compatible partner in a relationship with work.
Yeah. And can I touch on that with your breaks in play? Sorry, I used to study gambling, cognitive distortion, so breaks in play just came out. Anyway, what can I challenge you with in terms of thinking about breaks too? This is actually what the research around Adam Grant looks at, is actually it's better to have chunks of times or breaks, but there's a body of research around creativity as well, where actually you're much, much more creative if you look at a task and then you leave that task for periods of time and come back. There's some work from Andrew Huberman, I'm not sure if it's from him or he talks about it on his podcast though, where 90-minute cycles, if you have are how people work now, so they're called like circadian rhythms. So actually having breaks after 90 minutes is really, really important for productivity. So there's lots of work showing that actually working long hours is not as beneficial as being a bit more strategic in how you work.
Mm. Very good insight. And I'd like to lean towards individual differences which may exist in working types and working routines. So you've changed my mind that it works. It's a protocol which works for you and which helps you thrive, and it may help a lot of others thrive. I do like the idea personally around having moments of deep work, and Carl Newport has written a book on the subject, and really taking moments in your day for undivided attention. But I totally recognize that there's individual differences in working styles. So there's an element of maybe picking and choosing some of the protocols which works for you as an individual, which may help you thrive.
Yeah, and understanding that for your team. So what you're talking about is there's some research or work around what's called makers and managers time. So some people like to think like makers, so deep thinking. And some people in that time need half a day and some people need a full day. If you put one meeting in that day, why that person has to sit and deep think, whether or not it's research or engineering or whatnot, that can disrupt their full day. And then there's the manager's time, where you have those constant back-to-back meetings. So really understanding how you and your employees work, but also how you work for deep thinking. I need a full day often. I can't do, like, sometimes I can do mornings, but I like to have a full day. Otherwise, I find it really, really difficult to get into deep literature. So that's it. I feel like, though, we should now, I'd really like to kind of throw it out to the room and hear your strategies or hear your concerns around work-life balance. Is there anything that you disagreed with? Please, let's just throw it out there, and we'd love to hear your feedback.